Matthew's driving. That's not safe. I'll pretend I don't see that.
Yeah, no, I'm just sitting in my car. The building that I work in doesn't have great signal, so
Okay. If
yeah.
you were to drive, I would understand that. Welcome, week two. We had a great Q&A video from Kelly earlier. So if you didn't get a chance to see that, especially if you asked a question, check that on the feature tab on the Facebook group. Lots of great questions about working with the knee, working with the squat, especially with different sorts of post-op patients, kind of chronic condition patients, and a number of different great questions in there. So check that video out. We're going to have a look at your back squats tonight with Kelly. But before we get started, if you have questions that did not get asked or answered, let's hear those now before we get into your videos.
All right. Hi, everyone, by the way. I don't think I've talked on our live call yet, so I'm Kelly. If there's no questions right off the bat, all good. Thanks for all the questions over the week. If at any point you have questions, feel free to mic up, or the team will interrupt me if you throw them in the chat bar. But other than that, sounds like we'll get right into our back squats. Really good back squats from this week. So excited to go over that. Uh-oh. Trying to share my screen. Let me see. I got a new computer since the last time I shared my screen, and I need to. Oops. It won't let me share it. I have to
Sounds like a real Mitch issue over here.
I know. I was having trouble today. Uh-oh. Okay, it's telling me I need to quit and reopen Zoom. I am so sorry.
I'll have to fill this with awkward silence and or questions.
Yeah. Someone think of a question while I'm gone. I'll be right back. Let me wait. Did this work? Oh, now it's working. Did it work? Oh, sweet.
Working.
Then close these out of the way. I didn't have to leave. I can't get this out of the way.
Just press the red button.
Well, the bar thing was in the way that you guys can't see. Oh, I'm denying. Okay. Hot start, team. Thanks for hanging in there. Okay, we are going to start with Alan's video. We love this video. It is a 1 rep max attempt, so we will see some movement breakdown, completely expected with a 1 rep max attempt like we talked about last week. Let's get into it. From this lateral view, we like it because we can see a really good view of his breathing and bracing, sitting straight down, breaking parallel, the grind to stand back up, and succeeding with a good heavy lift. I think this is from 2 years ago now, so hopefully we got a little bit more weight on the bar for a 1 rep max, but a really solid lift for the back squat. So just starting from the top, just so we can review with a couple videos in the beginning. So we're seeing a good big belly breath in to provide a bunch of intra-abdominal pressure to create so much spinal stability to be able to try to move this bar all the way from the ground back up successfully. So you will see a open mouth breathe in, and then closing the mouth, holding your breath in. What I like to think about while I'm breathing into my abdomen, not a chest breath, it's a belly breath, and then clamping off that breath and maintaining all the intra-abdominal pressure, I feel like I am tensioning into the belt when I'm doing that. So breathe in, and then everything around that belt and around that spine tightens up, and we have tension into the belt. I don't like that cueing of pushing out into the belt, because that will commonly result in the athlete more bearing down or completely changing how they're bracing under a heavy load. Once they add a belt, should be the exact same step-by-step process with or without the belt. It's just the belt will further enhance your ability to brace and create more intra-abdominal pressure to be able to squat more weight. So great belly breath in, squeeze, bracing into the belt, tensioning into the belt. And we see a fault happen because, again, 1 rep max attempt, we see that good morning fault that we did discuss last week. So we see we're descending down with hips and knees releasing at the same time, hip crease just breaking that parallel, just breaking that, parallel, sorry to repeat. And then on the way up, what do we see? We see hips are rising first. And then during that sticking point, we're grinding, we're continuing to stand it up. We get there. Again, what that means is as the knees are trying to extend, the bar's not moving. We're putting all that work to the posterior chain to finish getting the job done, to be able to stand up. And what we're cueing Alan to do during this lift is basically screaming anything as loud as we can to hype him up to get it done. But we would cue him something like drive your chest up or drive your shoulders into the bar to at least promote continuing to move the body upward versus fall forward too much, where we get that forward torso angle that wouldn't be something he could finish the lift under. But so we're cueing him to try to drive the chest up, but we're also long-term seeing that breakdown and taking notes on that. What can we do with our next 8-week cycle of squatting, for example, to help improve his performance? And it would be things like biasing anterior chain versus posterior chain. So anytime he squats, thinking about driving with his chest up into the bar before we see that good morning fault happen, or choosing accessory exercises that are going to more promote quad loading versus posterior chain. That would be his best course of action to be able to improve on that type of squat fault. And again, next time he does it, that was, I believe, 385. Maybe we fast forward another 8-week cycle. Now we're attempting 395. We may still see a good morning fault, but maybe it doesn't happen until we get to that, again, 100+% next time we're 1 rep maxing. Cool. If there's any questions on that, go ahead and mic up. While you're thinking of that, though, we can get right into Mitch's back squat. I believe this is around, I think, 485, if I'm remembering correctly. Yep, 465, sorry. So same thing you're going to see walking out, finding that stance, breathe in, sticking point. The bar is going to slow down when we're getting to that 1 rep max attempt. Once we get past that sticking point, that's where you know you have the lift. You can obviously finish and then release that brace, for example. But we'll go through this in slow-mo because he's moving quick. So breathe, brace, sitting straight down, breaking parallel. Great work of keeping a brace neutral spine, and then finishing. So movement faults that we're seeing with Mitch, we know he is limited in ankle mobility. And this is, I think, before he invested in his most recent pair of lifters. So when we're in flatter shoes, we're seeing those heels come off the ground a bit. So that heel lift is when we lose full foot contact on the ground as we're driving up. He's obviously repositioning his foot flat on the ground, but any like loss in balance over that midfoot is potentially a less optimum position to be able to drive as strong as you can out of the bottom of the hole. You're more likely to like weight shift forward if the heels are coming off a little bit. So we want to obviously try to minimize the heels coming up. But he does a great job of not losing center of balance to be able to drive and stand up through that sticking point. A lot of us don't necessarily, like when we're working with clients that aren't familiar with what true 1 rep max feels, a lot of clients will say like, I think that's my 10 out of 10, but the bar speed doesn't change. It's still just as fast as it was 50 pounds ago. You can, as you get more comfortable seeing more and more lifts, you can obviously not tell them what their RP is for them. But when you start to see an actual slowing of just bar speed, then you'll know that they're probably getting closer to something more significant than just a 5 out of 10 RPE. So that is something that I always will take into it, like how fast did that bar move on the way up? Okay, just checking on this. All right. So those were our two awesome videos from Mitch and Alan that we always like to start with. I will briefly pause before we get into our videos from this week. If that brought up any questions, breathing and bracing, initiating the squat, sitting straight down, all things of that nature.
Yeah, quick question. So for the eccentric phase, though, we're expecting basically the same tempo from a 1 rep max to normal. Because I feel like me personally, I slow down a lot in eccentric, and then I like gas myself before I even get into the attempt. Hey, it's me.
Oh, what
Um,
is we'll get there.
so yeah,
Great question. I think we know that tempo squats are harder squats. So if you are going down almost too slow when it comes to a 1 rep max attempt, that might make it a little bit harder than it needs to. But on the other end of the spectrum, we don't want to just drop it all the way down, because then all that force is going to be even harder to stand it up against a heavy 1 rep max attempt. So it's hard. I can't give you a specific speed, but I would say descend into your squat with a controlled manner. So not intentionally slowing it down too much, but definitely showing control. So you will have the ability to maintain all that spinal stiffness as you may utilize that stretch reflex at the bottom, not an uncontrolled bounce, but a little bit of a bounce through the bottom of the range of motion. So I think if you feel like you're going slow, you're probably just descending with control. But if you feel like it's going too slow, allow yourself to move a little bit faster. That would be my recommendation.
right on. Thanks.
Cool. We've all seen that person that just like drops it like it's hot and then just collapses at the bottom. And that's obviously not as productive either. There's technique to it. Okay, so starting with a couple of good heavy squats from, I think his last name's Mutter, but group 9. So we didn't get a chance to look from the anterior view so far. So things that I'm picking up on from the anterior view is going to be, what's their stance width? Are their toes straight forward? Are they more pointed out? Do we get any asymmetry side to side with our legs? And when they demonstrate a great squat like this, we can see that he is well below parallel. Those are some of the things I'm picking up from the anterior view. Most of my squat analysis is going to come up from the lateral view, because we can get a better view of spinal position, depth, and things like that, torso angle. But I did want to start here just to show you the anterior view. So if you take a look at his post on the Facebook page, he posted a handful of videos. So thank you for doing that. You can see him adjust right there. I think some of his squats before were in this stance. And as a pretty tall guy, that's a long way to go up and down. That's a slightly narrow stance, I would say. So he adjusts to this feet just outside the hips stance width, and then demonstrates a really good squat. So I'll go through it in slow-mo. You can see that that is typically wider than a lot of the squat stances that you may see just in the gym yourself, but a lot of the squat stances that we're seeing on the Facebook page. Does a great job. We see just that slight adductor contribution of the knees coming in just a little bit, but not over the instep of the foot or anything. So I wouldn't consider that to be a valgus fault by any means, just our normal natural contribution of those adductors to help us extend the hip from the bottom of the squat. So I think this is really a fantastic squat. Appreciating that adjustment that I think he made from, I don't know if it was just week 1 to week 2, or couple of the comments from this week's discussion suggested maybe changing the squat stance, and it does result in a very comfortable looking squat, I would say, for being heavy, obviously. So from the lateral view, we can appreciate squat depth, torso angle, and some movement faults when present. So rep 1 looks great. Rep 2, we start seeing some of that good morning fault come up, and even more on that 3rd rep. So again, just to review, that good morning fall is the hips rising a little bit early, or that torso descending with one angle, but coming up a little bit more forward. And that just, again, indicates to us that posterior chain may be a little bit more, have a little bit more strength and contribution to the squat than his anterior chain. And that's commonly going to come up again, like Alan's 1 rep max, or maybe we didn't see it in rep 1, but as he gets more tired or fatigued with rep 2 to 3, it becomes more prominent. So taking a look at the endurance of the squat as well is helpful. So we see that his torso angle, let me pause on that first really solid rep. So his torso angle is a bit more forward, and that's going to be completely expected when it comes to the back squat. When we go from week 1 to week 2, the weight goes from the front rack to a back rack position. So physics literally will just force our torso angle to be pitched forward a little bit more than what we all saw during week 1. That's not always a movement fault. It is just the difference in weight shifting to keep our barbell stacked right over our midfoot. You can't really get away without a torso angle change. The main thing is that it's not too significant where you are running out of hip flexion range of motion, for example, where you cannot squat below parallel, or we're losing spinal position at the bottom of the squat. You will see that it is significantly harder to maintain a neutral spine in the movement of the back squat compared to the front squat with that change in weight distribution. So when it goes to our back, it is just simply harder to maintain a neutral spine because it requires more hip range of motion. When we get all the way to the bottom of our squat, you can see that that hip angle is going to be closed more than if he had even just 10 degrees more of an upright torso. It would require less hip flexion range of motion. We'll also see that it's it's much more common to have an overextension fault, basically that athlete that arches under the bar and loses that anterior core engagement under a barbell with the bar on the back rack. When it's in the front rack or in like a goblet position with a kettlebell, the weight's in front of you, so that anterior core stability just naturally, like, you're forced into it a little bit more because it's heavy. When it's on your back, you can not be lazy, but like get away with lacking that a little bit more because it's on your back. It's more of a passive back rack position, I would say, where it necessarily shouldn't be passive. Cool. So great work with that change in stance. That looked really solid. Solid back squat.
That's okay.
Sure.
So if you're seeing an excessive forward trunk lean, would you recommend lifters or like heels elevated for someone just to correct that, even if they're not lacking ankle mobility?
If they're not lacking ankle mobility, I may start with some verbal cueing of, like, if they're folding forward, that likely means maybe they're reaching their hips back. So I may start with, hey, I want you to just sit straight down. Or common cue that we love using is like, I want to be able to see the words on the front of your shirt to promote them to stay more upright than like lose that good upright chunk positioning against the barbell. So before immediately resorting to lifting the heels up, if they really aren't limited, I would try to change their positioning in space. Because you're right, it's not always a dorsiflexion limitation. It could just be motor control or a form issue. Maybe somebody 10 years ago told them they should always be sitting down and back, and they've just continued to do that. So I would start with cueing first to promote that, and it may work, it may not. If it doesn't work, then I have used the heel elevation or like plates under the heels to basically like have the athlete learn through doing what a more upright torso feels like. And then if there's really no mobility restriction, you can take away the plates and there's some carryover into that like new positioning. It's basically like changing form, even though it's it's basically like just changing form and like learning how to get from standing point A to the bottom of the squat point B and back. So just teaching them a new, more intentional upright torso position can help.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. That was great. Cool. All right, so the next one I wanted to pull up is from Alex. Oops. All right. A lot of colors on the bar. We love that. I didn't do the math, so I don't know exactly how much, but I think he said like 8 or 9 RPE.
It was in kilos, so I have no idea either.
It's too tough to count. Can't do it. Sometimes it's nice when it's kilos because you don't really know exactly what it is. Can't get in your own head. Kilos are heavier than pounds though, right? Either way, good work. So from the anterior view, looks like a really solid squat. We see that one leg kind of do the little stanky leg for a brief moment. So a little bit of asymmetry. But again, I think it was like higher RPE or higher percentage. So again, we're going to see a little bit of movement faults, and it's obviously really subtle. The reason I wanted to look at Alex's video too, though, is from the lateral view. I would say the more prominent fault can be seen here. Overall, solid lift. I love a lot of what I'm seeing on here. I'll play it through one more time. If anybody wants to contribute what they think I may be seeing, what you may be seeing as well. All right, I'm going to slow it down. So good brace, sinking straight down. At the bottom, we're seeing the heels lift off the ground just a little bit. We're losing good contact of that heel on the floor, kind of like what we saw with Mitch, even in lifters too. So lifters are, if you've never squatted in lifters, the bottom of the shoe is like super flat, solid. It's like a clunky heel. So it provides a really nice, solid connection to the ground. So when we see the heel lift off the ground, even in lifters, we know that we're not driving through that nice, solid, flat foot on the ground. Again, he is able to get heel back down on the ground, but we know that if this were a little bit heavier, or if we're trying to get closer to our 1 rep max, small little inefficiencies like that do eventually lead to maybe not making the next couple of kilos that he might add on there. So with him, we often will resort to the cue of sit straight down on your lift. And it's almost like Alex took this like completely literally in a way. So we want to see hips and knees break at the same time, which we definitely do. I really like that. Hips and knees break at the same time. And then we are trying to basically like drive those knees over the toes as far as we can. And we're sitting straight down onto the heels. So for Alex, if I saw this slight heel lift off the ground, I would cue him like, hey, I do actually want you to sit back only like a less than a half a centimeter, not a lot, because I don't want to resort in like a more forward angle. I really like this positioning. It would literally just be to keep that heel down just a hair more, to have better, to have a better drive off the ground, to see if we can add 2 to 3 more kilos on that bar, right? I'm seeing in the chat, loss of neutral spine at the bottom of the squat. Butt wink. A little bit. Yes, I do also see that. If we see that slight change right there, it's really, really subtle. So that's also a secondary fault too. By adding like things like we talked about last week, if we slow down that tempo, like what's the best way to reduce these faults? We really like to use tempo and pauses in the moments when those faults come up. So maybe having him warm up with a couple, probably not having him pause at the bottom with that heavy of a bar right now, but as he's warming up, maybe like really own that position and feel how much tension is maintained in the back, heels flat on the ground before driving up, and that can be helpful. But it's really, really subtle. And he does a great job of being able to maintain spinal stiffness. Like I'm not seeing a complete rounding where he's not able to maintain stiffness. So good work, but definitely something to keep in mind in the back of our head as well. Just catching up on the chat. His elbows pop up a bit right at the bottom. Evan saying, noticing the elbows are popping up a little bit right out of the bottom, keeping them with the torso could clean up some things too. Yeah, like back squats, bars on your back. It's a leg exercise. We're talking about core, but what are our arms doing? What's our upper body doing? I feel like that's like the 10th thought that anybody really thinks about when it comes to a barbell back squat. So I guess that's a great conversation. So what I think about when I'm gripping the bar behind my back is I actually like thinking about bending the bar over my back. So I'm basically almost doing like an isometric lat pull down with the bar on my back. So what does that do? If we're like pulling down and engaging our lats, think about where your lats attach. They attach all along your thoracolumbar fascia in the low back. So when that's nice and tight, combined with a really efficient brace and intra-abdominal pressure to create that spinal stiffness, nothing feels really much better like to help keep that back in a really solid position. So thinking about pulling that bar back or down over our back, almost spreading the chest apart, like everything feels nice and engaged along your back, and that will help further contribute to keeping that back nice and flat under the bar, because the bar wants nothing more than to push you forward and flex you towards the ground. So what we're using is all of our strength in our spinal extensors, in our lats, to keep that as stiff as possible to hold that line. So to touch on what Evan was saying too, the elbows come up a little bit. What I don't necessarily think that is losing some of that tension. He's almost like helping him lift up or further engage all of those extensors. But I will see some athletes almost like let the elbows come forward, or like they get soft grip on the bar. And I've always wondered why, because we want to like own that bar and really like pin it to our body. So any like looseness through there, I would say would be less effective than a little bit of the elbows coming up. So I think that is naturally happening to help him resist the like forward force of the bar. So that looks very normal and productive, but great thought to remind me to talk about. Cool. So yeah, next time you back squat, think about bending the bar over the back. You'll probably feel a little bit stiffer through your midsection, just naturally from the lats. Cool. All right, so I wanted to get Vanessa's video up next. Whoa, that is sideways. When I was downloading these, they were all downloading crooked, but I thought I had it all figured out. Okay. Cool. Delay number 2. Sorry, team.
I just appreciate that you're going in a full circle every time.
So I literally tried. It won't let me flip it like the right way. I literally have to flip it twice and then vertical. So it's like back. I don't know. I was literally going to ask you. And then I eventually got here, so I left it. Anyways. Okay, so let's take a look from the lateral view. Since we have this here, we get one squat out of Vanessa. So we're seeing a great squat overall. I really like positions. Yep, we have 2 wheels on the bar. That's always huge. Good to see. But good depth. A little bit of that heel comes off the ground like we already talked about. But we do see something a little, I wouldn't say wrong, but a little unique maybe on her concentric phase. So from the ground, we see hips are rising a little bit early. Not unheard of when it's 2 big wheels. That's heavy. And then we see this almost rebend under the bar to finish. So play it a little more smooth. See that bit of a rebend under the bar. I don't necessarily consider it a movement fault, but we have seen this before. especially when that good morning squat fault is present. So the good morning squat fault will really bias that posterior chain and pitch you forward a little bit. And then that redip under the bar almost provides like a second attempt at like a stretch reflex on the quads to finish the rep. So that's what I'm seeing as she descends, stands up, and you see that little bit of a redip under the bar. From the anterior view, we can also pick up on, like I said, squat stance, foot position, and any asymmetries. So I'll play this through a couple times so you can see. It definitely doesn't look symmetrical, which is okay. So I'll play it through a little slower for you, third time. And so we're seeing that already like halfway through that eccentric phase. And if I pause at the bottom here, that definitely is not looking perfectly symmetrical. So what are we seeing? I'm trying to think of my rights and lefts. I'm so bad at that. So the right knee is driving over that toe significantly more than the left knee. So you can see that shin angle is much less on that left side. And I think, is Vanessa on the call? I think she is on the call. I think I read that she has a history of the left side, has a ACL repair and some other things. So she does have a significant history on that left knee. And I think it was her that was saying it's just never felt the same. Vanessa says true. Thank you for confirming. Is there still any pain on board with that left knee?
No pain.
Great.
But I mean, it like affects everything. And this is exacerbated by the fact that I haven't squatted in months. So I can usually like make it prettier over time, but it is just the way I move.
Got you. So that with the lack of pain on board, which is really positive, of course, do you feel like there's still a big strength asymmetry side to side?
Yeah, if you go to the beginning of the video, you can see that my quads are different size. It's kind of fuzzy on here, but it's like very noticeable in real life too.
Got you. I didn't pick up, but I wasn't looking too as hard as you might be looking.
Yeah, but
That's fair. Yeah.
something else I was gonna say about the thing is that's funny to me about my squatting is that it feels symmetrical to me. And if I look down at my feet, they're never actually in line.
Got you. I see. Yeah, it's really common after having a surgery like you had, especially years later. Obviously, there was a big strength asymmetry when you had the surgery. And then whether like no matter how much single leg strengthening you might have done in your rehab, or like even if you're putting all the effort to strengthen single leg again, so the other leg can't just take over, it's almost like a developed pattern for some athletes where they're constantly resorting to that other side. So while obviously the answer to this would be doing a lot of single leg strength training so that your other leg can't overpower that one side and like do 60% versus 50-50. It is kind of like a learned pattern. So do it using like video feedback because it feels like you're completely symmetrical and moving like you'd want to move. We can see on the video that it's still present. So a lot of CrossFit gyms don't have mirrors or anything, thank goodness. Because CrossFit athletes, all we would do is flex, guilty myself. But that could be helpful to give you a little bit of feedback as far as like, okay, this is like, I'm already starting to lean away. It just so anytime you squat, you're getting the stimulus of quad loading and knee loading in a 50-50 manner versus a little bit of asymmetry. And then we do see that rebend of the knees on the way up too, which is cool to point out. Any thoughts on how, say she wasn't a PT and wasn't as aware and in tune with her asymmetries and things like that, but does anybody have thoughts on how they would test single leg strength to see if that's what is the contributing factor to some asymmetries in a back squat? Would we use like the manual muscle testing of having them sit on a table and resist against, or like a break test with just us pushing on their knee? Or does anybody have ideas how you would really tease out right and left strength?
I don't think
really
any of
like-
us are strong enough to do a break test on her.
Right.
I would think like a
Exactly.
step up or like an anterior step down or something functional, like go for height, go as low as you can before you lose it. Just some ways that way to make it functional.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Like the average quad is really, really hard to break, especially for someone that's squatting. They're like an athlete that's squatting 215 is gonna laugh at you, being like, "Oh, you're not strong enough." Well, you couldn't even break my leg. So I love all these suggestions of a step down. Really nice way. One that we really like to use is like a 5 rep max rear foot elevated split squat, and seeing like, okay, if we have 35s in my hands and I do 5 on my quote unquote like good leg or strong leg, and then you can really appreciate how much more difficult it could be at a certain weight. So that's a really nice way to show like, hey, we still have a lot of work to do for this side because of XYZ, whatever might have happened. So yeah, we really like either like a single leg squat, a pistol squat. Doesn't necessarily have to mean like a full single leg squat, but a single leg squat to a box could be considered a pistol squat. All of those are really nice ways to get objective, meaningful data for somebody like this. So I love that. I actually have not heard of a crane scale. Sorry, I'm just catching up. Force plate though, it's what it sounds like. So like a force plate that can give you really good objective data too, for sure. So plenty of options. I don't have a crane scale at my clinic yet, so I'm going to stick with the rear foot elevated split squat for now. Cool. Awesome.
Would you ever do like a single leg press to try and look at asymmetry?
Yeah, if you have access to one of those and enough weight on there to get a good measurement of like a 5 rep max, that's a really nice retestable way to assess that as well. Not a bad idea, especially if someone might be a little more like if they're coming to you for knee pain and doing a rear foot elevated split squat's a little pain, like if there's any pain on board with that, usually a leg press I think is more tolerated. The most important thing would just be to stick with something that you can retest in the future. So that would absolutely check all those boxes. Cool. Gmo says crane scales are expensive. Yeah. We got the reverse hyper. So that's next on our list. Oops. Okay, hopefully all these are upright. Okay. We have a couple of videos. Oh, I did this. Okay, Alan. If I rotate right, that would theoretically make it upright, correct? Why does it go there?
I think however you download them are inverted. So you would actually want to rotate left to start.
Okay, well, we got there. I tried that. Let me see. And it doesn't do anything.
Disregard.
Yeah, I was like really confused today when I was trying to do this, but this is what we got. And we're there. I'll get to that one later. Let's start from the lateral view. Okay. I really like, I think it's Peter's videos. He was kind enough to show us back squats just on flat with his regular shoes without any heel elevation. And then he threw some change plates under his heel so we can see the difference between his positioning because he is having a bit of trouble getting low enough, breaking that parallel. So let's start with the baseline squat. So yeah, I would say the most prominent fault is that we're not squatting through full range of, well, his full range of motion, but we're not breaking that parallel. So we would like to be able to see increased depth with his squat. So I'm going to pause him right at the bottom. Whoops. Here, so we can see that. So then over here, we're adding some heels in the form of change plates. and we'll let him roll. It looks different. It looks better. And then there's still room to improve even further, but we're definitely getting lower. The torso angle is a little bit more upright. So at least if you haven't tried it yet and you still don't believe us, it is going to make a difference. Let me draw in. Got it. Oops, is this gonna work? Can you see my green line? And sorry, that's not super straight. And it also left. Let me try this. Here we go. So I know they're kind of far apart, but you can see that's a significant difference in torso angle. So anytime we can have a more upright torso, that is going to simply just place less force through our lumbar spine, which I'm a dedicated athlete, but I will always take the easy way out. So if you're telling me there's less force on my back, less work I have to do to oppose those forces, sign me up. So I really do like, that's why any powerlifting competition, any weightlifting competition, we're going to be in weightlifting shoes when that's an option, because while I have enough dorsiflexion range of motion to be able to squat through full range of motion with an upright torso, if I can add even more and make it 1% more efficient, that's what I'm interested in as a crazy psychopath athlete. So just know that that's an option. So thank you again for adding that into your video submissions. Let me get my mouse back. Cool. So we can kind of get rid of this one. Now to go through the heels elevated squat, while it did help, I would still like to see a little bit more range of motion. There is a little bit left to be had with this squat. Now I'm seeing another movement related fault, that the heels on the plate didn't necessarily cover up. So I'll play it through slowly. If anybody's catching what I'm seeing, feel free to drop in. Oh, okay, Peter's also saying he decreased the bar 50 pounds. Not a bad idea to practice like changing things with less than heavy weight. So Amber saying that reaching the butt back, lots of lumbar extension. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm seeing. Great observation. So if we see this, sorry to put you on the spot like this and do this to you, but the bar's not moving, yet we're seeing a lot of movement under the bar initially. So this initiation of the squat with opening up into that overextension fault, I think is the next most important thing to talk about with his squat. So what we see with that overextension fault is that our athletes are finding spinal stability through extension. So we're basically like loading up our joints and all of the extensors of our back to create stability. And what that eventually leads to is we run out of hip flexion range of motion at the bottom of the squat. So that overextension fault, our pelvis will tilt forward. So those acetabulums basically face downward a little bit. So it takes less range of motion for the femur essentially to run into the end of its range of motion. That will limit how deep you can go. So if we had him brace anteriorly and then break hips and knees at the same time, well, with a more neutral spine position, we may be able to get 1 to 2 more inches of hip flexion before he feels like he runs out of room. We're either going to see that, and we're going to see that he just stops his squat short, or we're going to see the opposite and we're going to sacrifice spinal position, and then we're going to round underneath the bar to achieve that deeper range of motion, which I have an example of next. But when we see this overextension fault like he's demonstrating, clinically, that's very commonly associated with that like low back, really compressive feeling, like SI joint type discomfort. They point right to that spot anytime they squat. And then in between sets, they like roll on the ground and try to like almost lumbar manip themselves. I literally saw that today. So Any changes that you can do to increase that anterior core engagement throughout the squat is helpful. Some of my favorite cues for that, because it's hard to cue for this, would be before he sets up, hey, don't let me come and punch you in the gut. Feel how you just kind of engage that. I want you to keep your minds focused there on holding that tension throughout the squat. I know that's a little wordy. You can think of rib cage down to belly button. Any type of cues along that line will help. Again, using tempo is really nice in this position or this scenario too, of like give your cue of whatever it is, XYZ, to increase anterior core engagement to avoid overextending. Have them start to initiate the squat as soon as they overextend. You pause them, re-engage, continue moving forward. So that's how you can also coach and cue and fix this motor control issue that's resulting in lack of depth for his squat. Tough one to fix, but really, really important to not overlook. I'll leave that be. Oops. I thought it fixed itself. Quick break for any questions while I rotate this. Cool. Okay, so Michelle gave us some back squats, of course. And what I'm seeing is a little bit of loss of lumbar positioning at the bottom. So that butt wink or lumbar reversal, whatever you prefer to call it. And so a lot of us typically will pick right up on this little bit of like change in positioning at the bottom and be like, oh, that's a lumbar reversal. We just need to fix that butt wink. But it is really important to back up and see, well, how did we get there? Because this would be, I already mentioned this before, we initiate with a little bit of extension. We're seeing she's a little bit more overextended than a neutral spine would be. So when we're in that overextended position, we eventually run out of room. And then in order to achieve that hip crease below the knee, we will round out of the way and then come back up from the squat. So we're going to preserve something. We're either going to preserve spinal stiffness and sacrifice depth of the squat, or we're going to preserve depth of the squat and lose spinal positioning. And so we see that squat fault really commonly in the CrossFit space. So be aware of which is presenting to you. And this will commonly present as anterior hip pain, as low back pain, basically that significant load under a barbell with that change in spinal positioning can often irritate a lot of low back. And then they're coming to you without being able to squat comfortably anymore. So that would be the two scenarios. Cool. We have a couple more videos that we can go through. But if anybody has any questions in general on squatting now, feel free to join the chat.
I have a quick question, Kelly.
Yeah.
Last week, Mitch kind of talked about when he does his assessments of squats, he looks kind of lumbopelvis first. As you do it, is that the same tactic you use with your analysis?
Yes, because I think that's the first thing I'll pick up on. But it can be, but I think I don't want to speak for Gmo, but I think Gmo might start at the feet first and then work his way up. So there's no like, you have to do it this way just because Mitch does it or I do it. I tend to also just pick up on lumbopelvic positioning as well. As long as you have your system that works for you, that's going to be your best option. So those are two options. Either start at the feet and work your way up, or you can start right at the hip and go from there. But any way you can develop a little bit of a pattern is going to be helpful. So really good that you're at least thinking about it. Cool. So everyone's squat is going to look different. As long as we hit those points of performance, there's going to be a little bit of variation based off your limb length, based off your available ankle range of motion and hip range of motion. As long as we're still maintaining neutral spine, getting hip crease below the knee, knees are tracking over the toes, all are really good squats. So Samira, we can appreciate, she got long femurs, really long leg club. So she naturally is going to be leaning a little bit more forward, as you can see. And that makes it a little bit harder to, again, resist the heavy bar on your back to want to throw you forward, but also maintain neutral spine. So we do see a little bit of loss of spinal position at the bottom. So that lumbar reversal. Sorry, I gotta rotate. Rotate, rotate, flip. So embarrassing. One more. So for Samira, like we saw from the lateral view, those femurs nice and long. Look at our squat stance. And then remember our very first video that we pulled up from, I think, group 9. And that adjustment that, again, that athlete with long legs made, he started with the heels, like basically right under the hips, and then moved his feet so they were outside of the hips. We know that when somebody has long femurs, the more we can get out of that forward and back sagittal plane into a wider stance, more toed out position, it will shorten that length of the femur in the sagittal plane. That means hips can stay a little closer to the heels, torso can stay more upright. So appreciating this slightly narrow stance while she's still getting the job done. She could a little bit lower, but from the lateral view was breaking parallel. Someone like this, I would absolutely, my first go-to would be, before adding heel lift or anything like that, would be adjusting that stance. And as long as this athlete has the proper hip mobility, really, and also like adductor muscle length to be able to have that wider stance, they'll have a much better, to be honest, like experience of squatting, because I don't know anybody that wants to be lean forward with a super, super heavy load on their back. So the more upright we can be, the less force, the less work their back has to do, and the more comfortable squat. And again, in CrossFit, as far as performance goes, we're doing things like snatching and cleaning, thrusters, wall balls, you name it, overhead squats. That upright torso is going to be crucial for even the ability to do some of these things, but as their efficiency and anytime we can improve their performance, I think most CrossFit athletes are always grateful. So just have those little tips and ideas in the back of your mind. Slightly wider. All right, let's take a look at last one more at 7:53. Really solid squat from Troy. So this is a really nice example of appreciating, like, this squat is meeting all the needs or criteria of the points performance of it, but it's going to look a little bit different. We see, or I think in his assessment, he admitted stiff ankles. We have lifters on board here, and we do see a little bit of like, we're reaching the end of that ankle range of motion, but still really nice depth, upright torso, really strong looking lift. 2 wheels and some. And then if we take a look from the anterior view, we can pick up on a little bit of asymmetry here. So there's a bunch of things that can contribute to asymmetry. I'm going to stop it right at the bottom so we can see. Oops. I always have a hard time seeing asymmetry when they're moving. I got to pause it. So I really like having videos of myself as well as clients, even in the clinic, to show them, as well as just slow it down for myself. So I think Troy's on the call, and in his assessment mentioned he's been dealing with some hip pain. So often, like, that's the number one thing we're seeing people for typically when when pain is on board. So that's a really common cause of change, like at least not letting a client move symmetrically. So my first thought would be, well, which hip are we having pain in? If that's the case, is he still on the call?
It was right hip. At the time, it was right hip. Hip is good now.
Great work. Why am I blanking on my rights and lefts? Right side. So we can see that the right hip is going through a little bit less hip flexion range of motion. So that there we go right there, that when we're trying to offload irritated structures, we're going to shift away from that, for example. So whether it's differences in strength that can result in asymmetry, just like we saw with Vanessa earlier, or it can be pain driven. I got a thumbs down. Sorry, I got distracted. If anybody disagrees, let me know. But pain can be the second thing that's most commonly resulting in asymmetries that we're seeing. Another thumbs down. I can't see who's doing it, so. But yeah, glad that cleared up. But when that's occurring, it's important that as the physical therapist that we're able to clear up some of that pain so they can continue to squat symmetrically. But keeping in mind, we can, like I already mentioned, that torso angle changes when we go from a back squat to a front squat. So if we're having pain at end range hip flexion, well, maybe we can still have them squatting in the form of a front squat, because we know the EMG activation between the two is pretty similar. It's not like changing the way we're strengthening. So they can still squat, and they may be able to tolerate a little bit more with that front squat position instead. So just wanted to point out that last one. Cool. All right, well, it's 7:57. I will unshare. Thank you all for hanging in there with my new computer and getting all my settings up to date. Any questions before we wrap up these squats?
Yeah, I have a question. I guess if there's so if you saw a fault like that where an athlete was using more one side to drive out of the hole, for example, but there's no pain, is that really a problem? Like, do we really need to like say, hey, like you need to really fix that? Or is it just like going to develop into an issue over time?
Great question. If there's no pain on board, I don't think it's a problem. We're not stopping them. Like, alarms aren't going off. Stop doing that. I would simply point it out. I'd be like, hey, do you realize it looks like you're really using one side more than the other? They probably have no idea. And I would just say, like, either take a video, show them, and just cue them to maybe use that one side a little bit more. Just because, yeah, long term, like if you're how much can you single leg squat compared to bilateral squat? Probably way less. So just as far as performance, that's why I would want to address it in some way. But by no means being like, oh, you're really at risk for like loading your back asymmetrically, like you better watch it. Like that's the last thing ideas you want to put in your head. So anytime I can reframe it to like, hey, this is going to make you so much better, that's the angle that I would want to come from.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for the thought. Any others?
Yeah, I got a couple questions. So in regards to some of the videos that we went over, like Alan's video and a couple others at heavier loads, I've noticed people will tend to kind of shoot that hip back or that butt kind of jet out. Is that something that we're overly concerned about when it's at a higher load? Like, are we trying to like correct that? Or are we just saying, oh, that's like your max effort and you're just really like putting it all out there? Does that make sense?
Do you mean the good morning squat fall on the way up, or as they're initiating with butt back?
Well, I guess that's the one thing about the good morning squat I'm a little confused about too, because are we calling it a good morning squat regardless of what phase of the squat it is, whether it's the eccentric or concentric? Is it just a good morning fault regardless of which direction we're going?
No, let's nail this down first. So the good morning squat fault is specifically only on the way up.
Right. Okay.
That's, you'll see the athlete descend as normal as you'd expect. As they stand up, they resort into that forward torso position, and then finish the lift. So a good morning exercise is just barbell on the back hinging. So that's why it's named a good morning squat fault, because from the squat, we almost put ourselves into that good morning exercise position. And so why that happens is at a certain point, say 90% and more, the quads now are no longer strong enough to move the weight. So you'll see the knees extend, but the bar doesn't change position. And so then the posterior chain is like, okay, well, I'll finish the job. And then they finish the rep itself. Does that make sense to why it's like a quad? The quads are weaker than the posterior chain.
Yeah, I understand the good morning movement. I guess
Oh, sorry.
I mostly just wanted to clarify, like, if you can call it a good morning squat on the way down as well, like if someone has extremely excessive forward lean. But my biggest question was like seeing Alan's video and a couple other videos where people really like shoot their hips back initially and then correct it. Does that make sense? Are we
Yep.
worried about that movement pattern?
Well, the first part that you asked, the on the way down, just a forward torso angle, that wouldn't be necessarily a good morning squat fault. We would call that kind of like an immature squat where they get more just like hinging than squatting. So that would be different. So then sorry, I'm just now backtracking. We're going to see movement faults like come on only at like that 90% or more range, of course. And we're really only squatting that heavy or testing 1 rep max pretty rarely. So not necessarily like it's something we want to aim for as an optimal movement pattern. But no, I'm not necessarily concerned if it happens once from like a tissue health standpoint. We're pushing it to the max and trying to establish that 1 rep max and seeing if we can finish the lift. We're going to get it done no matter what it takes to do so. Does that answer it for you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, again, it's just something I've noticed that hasn't necessarily been pointed out, and I just want to make sure that we're not, or that at least I'm not missing that as like a movement fault. And I think I'm just kind of observing that when people are just at heavier loads, not necessarily just a common movement regardless of the load, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right when making that observation of it really shows up as you get closer to your 1 rep max. And it's just a really common fault. Our posterior chains are, for a lot of us, are stronger than our quads. So that's why I think you might have be seeing it so frequently.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Of course. Cool. Well, if there's no other questions, we'll wrap up with Alan.
All right, team. First and foremost, we hope you have a great Thanksgiving. Hopefully you get Thursday and Friday off work. If you don't get Friday off, sorry about that. Otherwise, week 3 is coming up. So make some time, especially with the holidays coming up, to look at the material and then get into the gym. This week, we're going to be deadlifting. This is arguably the most functional lift that you take away from this course, especially looking away from the fitness athlete towards the general population of every single human being bends over and picks up stuff from the floor. So this should be the heaviest lift of the class, which means ideally no empty barbells this week. We'd like to see you go as heavy as you're comfortable. Again, the whole goal is, we don't see faults until we start to get heavy. So please lift as heavy as you're comfortable to go. We have deadlift science as our lecture to support deadlifting this week. And then if you deadlift, sumo, or have any other sort of common modification that you use to deadlift, we'd love to see those videos. Otherwise, the movement instructions this week and what we're going to be seeing for most of you is going to be the conventional deadlift because it translates really well to other movements in CrossFit. But by all means, if you're a power lifter, and you like to pull sumo, we'd love to look at your sumo deadlift as well. Sweet. Have a great week. Enjoy your time off. We'll see you all next Monday night. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.